She was born into a world few will ever touch, a home where wealth wasn't just measured in bank statements, but in influence. Deals made behind boardroom doors, titles whispered among aristocrats, and favors owed by the powerful. From a sprawling country estate in Oxfordshire, surrounded by staff, chauffeurs, and the glow of money, Ghislaine Maxwell was raised as the crown jewel of Britain's most formidable media dynasty. In episode 1 of this series, we told the story of her father, Robert Maxwell, magnate, parliamentarian, and feared patriarch, behind a publishing empire that spanned continents. Ghislaine, the youngest of 9 children, lived in a world of private tutors, elite boarding schools, and formal dinners where even the silverware had rules. But while the papers chronicled her family's power plays and charity galas, there were darker undercurrents inside the Maxwell home. Fear, control, and a father whose grip never loosened. How does a woman raised among Oxford scholars and London's social elite end up at the center of one of the most disturbing human trafficking conspiracies of the modern age? Today, we follow Ghislaine Maxwell's journey from heiress to accused predator, from the manicured lawns of Buckinghamshire to the fluorescent lights of a Brooklyn courtroom. I'm Sandy McKenna, and along with Abraham Ulrich, welcome to Sinners and Secrets.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Imagine being born into a world where opulence wasn't a dream. It was your normal. That's the world Ghislaine Maxwell stepped into on Christmas Day 1961 as the youngest of 9 children in the powerful Maxwell family. Her father, Robert Maxwell, wasn't just a business magnate. He was a force of nature whose reach extended across continents and industries. To understand Ghislaine Maxwell, you have to step inside Headington Hill Hall, a 53-room Oxfordshire mansion once described by the Sunday Times as the best council house in the country. Ghislaine grew up in this grand Oxfordshire estate that signaled her family's immense wealth and influence. A fortress of power perched on manicured grounds complete with uniformed staff and a security gate that kept the outside world firmly at bay. Inside, the Maxwell children were raised in a bubble. Wealth wasn't whispered, it was absolute. Chauffeurs waited at the ready, nannies dressed them every morning, even mealtimes came with protocols. Lavish parties, private tutors, and vacations in the French Riviera were all just part of their everyday world. But beneath the glittering exterior, there were fractures behind closed doors. Among the 9 children, one stood out, Ghislaine, the youngest, the so-called favorite. While her siblings faced their father's legendary wrath, Ghislaine, by most accounts, was Robert's chosen heir. Not in business, but in temperament. A daughter who mirrored his charm and learned early how to navigate the high-stakes world of media moguls and political alliances. Ghislaine proved adept at navigating complex emotional and social landscapes. From elite prep schools to Oxford hollowed halls, she learned not just to succeed, but to charm. Early on, she became a magnetic presence in social settings, embodying confidence and sophistication that were second nature to someone raised among Britain's most influential circles. At Headington Hill, visitors included the Murdochs, Rothschilds, and members of the British aristocracy. Weekend luncheons were less about leisure and more about alliances, power brokers shaping business deals while their children played croquet on the lawn. But who was Ghislaine behind the velvet curtains? Friends from early years described her as a bright, witty, and eager to please, but never naive. At Headington School, an elite all-girls boarding institution, she earned a reputation for both sharp intellect and sharper social instincts. One former classmate later said, Ghislaine could read a room faster than most adults. She knew when to charm and when to retreat. After boarding school, Ghislaine followed a familiar path for Britain's privileged few, Oxford University. There, she studied modern history and dined at the tables of exclusive student socialites where old money and future politicians mingled over port and cigars. It was at Oxford where Ghislaine honed what some would later call her greatest weapon, adaptability. In a single evening, she could seamlessly transition from aristocratic charm to the streetwise wit inherited from her Eastern European father. Beneath the surface of the carefully curated social presence, those closest to the Maxwells say Ghislaine never truly escaped the long shadow of Headington Hill. Her father's expectations loomed. His control remained absolute, even as she sipped champagne with dukes and financiers. The foundation had been laid. Privilege, power, and the early training to survive under a patriarch's thumb. But what no one knew then was how far Ghislaine would carry those lessons and into whose hands she would eventually place them. Because Ghislaine's story was just the beginning, and the next chapter would take her from London's gilded ballrooms to the ruthless world of global media. It's hard to ignore how often power's passed down like an heirloom in families like the Maxwells. But in this case, it feels like Ghislaine inherited something much more corrosive, her father's obsession with control.
By the time Ghislaine Maxwell left Oxford, she wasn't just an heiress. She was a fixture of London's upper crust, a name that carried weight in the city's most exclusive circles. While her siblings pursued quieter careers, Ghislaine gravitated toward the public eye, where social finesse and ambition were valuable assets. At Oxford, her education went beyond academics. It was there that she expanded her Rolodex, forging connections with the future power players across politics, finance, and media. But Ghislaine wasn't just satisfied with name-dropping. She needed it to make herself indispensable in any room that she entered. In the 1980s, London was a playground for Ghislaine. The Royal Ascot horse races, black-tie fundraisers, polo matches. In her 20s, she seamlessly transitioned from heiress to operator. Whether brokering introductions at a charity gala or charming diplomats at black-tie dinners, Ghislaine became a well-known fixture in Europe's upper crust. Her fluency in the unspoken codes of the elite, how to build alliances, when to defer, and when to dominate, made her a rising star in her own right. Yet those who moved within these circles say Ghislaine wasn't just another socialite. She was sharp, adaptable, able to slip in between posh debutante and shrewd operator depending on the room. At one charity ball, a society columnist noted how she could charm a royal and a rugby player in the same breath. But this wasn't just about glamour. It was about strategy. Behind the smiles, Ghislaine was positioning herself as more than Robert Maxwell's daughter. Privately, she was cultivating a network, a Rolodex peppered with future MPs, business moguls, and minor royals. Contacts that would later prove invaluable. And then there were the romantic rumors. In the bars of Chelsea and the back rooms of Mayfair clubs, whispers swirled. Ghislaine had been linked, albeit briefly, to a distant Windsor cousin, one step removed from the royal scandal. Others claimed she enjoyed the company of powerful financiers who kept their names out of the press. But while London's gossip pages obsessed over her charm, few noticed the moves happening behind the scenes. Robert Maxwell, ever the patriarch, continued to shape Ghislaine's path, gifting her a London townhouse in Kensington and, most notably, a yacht, the Lady Ghislaine. To friends, the 180-foot vessel was a symbol of affection. To those inside the Maxwell family, it was a leash disguised as luxury. While Ghislaine played hostess aboard Mediterranean cruises, her father's empire expanded into the global media market, with Ghislaine increasingly acting as an unofficial ambassador at galas and media events. Sources close to the Maxwell business recall her sitting in on meetings and overseeing the UK assets, including properties and charity foundations tied to the family's media holdings. But behind the sparkle of London's nightlife, there were cracks. Robert's empire, much like Ghislaine's social standing, looked untouchable. But as we know now, appearances can be deceiving because just beneath the surface of their carefully curated world, debts were mounting and the tides were already beginning to shift. As the Maxwell dynasty teetered on the edge of collapse, Ghislaine would soon face a fall unlike anything she could have ever imagined. What stands out to me here is how calculated she was. She wasn't just attending these events. She was building a network like it was her job. It's a reminder that social climbing isn't just about champagne and ballrooms. It's a strategy.
In November 1991, Ghislaine Maxwell's life took a sudden and devastating turn. Her father, the larger-than-life media tycoon Robert Maxwell, was found dead floating in the Atlantic near his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine. While the official ruling was accidental drowning, whispers of suicide and foul play swirled around the mysterious circumstances. When Robert Maxwell's empire collapsed, the world watched in shock for Ghislaine. The loss was more than just personal. It marked the unraveling of everything her life had been built upon. The headlines were ruthless. Her father's sudden death at sea, his yacht adrift off the Canary Islands, ironically named the Lady Ghislaine, became front-page news across the globe. A media tycoon who fell from grace overnight, accused of plundering hundreds of millions from employees' pension funds, leaving his family to face the wreckage. For Ghislaine, it wasn't just the loss of her father. It was the collapse of the towering figure who shaped her identity, her social standing, and her future. Those who knew her at the time say the shock cut deep and she appeared hollowed out, wandering between her London home and her late father's crumbling offices, untethered for the first time. The Maxwell name, once synonymous with power and wealth, became a symbol of disgrace and betrayal. But grief wasn't Ghislaine's only burden. With the Maxwell name now synonymous with scandal, Ghislaine found herself unwelcome in the same social circles where just months before she had been the star guest. The invitation stopped, the whispered alliances dried up, the townhouse in Kensington grew quieter. In London, society whispered behind closed doors. Will the Maxwells lose everything? Will Ghislaine testify? Is she as ruthless as her father? One former family acquaintance told the Telegraph, Ghislaine was Robert's chosen one. Without him, she was adrift. But Ghislaine wasn't one to linger among the ruins. Within weeks of Robert's funeral, she quietly liquidated personal assets and disappeared, leaving behind scandal-ridden London for the polished anonymity of New York City. There, away from the tabloids and bankruptcy proceedings, Ghislaine sets her sights on something new, something bigger. Arriving in the early 1990s, Ghislaine began carving out a place for herself in the city's elite social circles. Armed with the polish and connections of her upbringing, she quickly became a fixture at high-profile events and glamorous parties. New York's upper echelons, an eclectic mix of old money, new money, and international power players, welcomed her with open arms. Ghislaine had an undeniable talent for networking. She exuded charm and sophistication, effortlessly connecting with the city's socialites, financiers, and cultural icons. To many, she was a fascinating enigma, the British socialite with a tragic backstory and an air of mystery. Her ability to navigate these circles wasn't just about charm. It was a calculated effort to rebuild her identity and regain the security she had lost. Her early years in New York saw her forging relationships with some of the most influential figures in the city. She moved seamlessly through the worlds of fashion, philanthropy, and business, always positioning herself at the center of the action. She seemed to thrive in this environment where charisma and connection could carry as much weight as money. Sources say she arrived on the Upper East Side armed with a little more than her name, her connections, and the social skills she honed inside the boardrooms and ballrooms of her youth. But New York City didn't just offer reinvention, it offered access, and Ghislaine Maxwell, the fallen heiress, knew exactly how to seize it. Because in the marble lobbies and penthouse suites of Manhattan's elite, Ghislaine would soon cross paths with a man who would pull her even deeper into the shadows, Jeffreyepstein. You know, I think about the shame, the sudden loss of privilege, and how someone like Ghislaine would process that. Not many heiresses go from the front page to running from the cameras overnight.
In the bustling social scene of the 1990s New York, Ghislaine Maxwell crossed paths with Jeffreyepstein, a financier whose presence among the city's elite was gaining momentum. Their introduction came at the time when Ghislaine was still working to reestablish herself after the devastating collapse of her father's empire. What began as an acquaintance quickly evolved into a relationship that would intertwine their lives in ways neither could have fully anticipated. Epstein was known for his sharp intellect and ability to forge relationships with influential individuals. His wealth, though somewhat mysterious in origin, afforded him access to the exclusive circles that Maxwell was adept at navigating. For Ghislaine, Epstein represented a partner who could provide stability and opportunity in a city where reputation and connections were paramount. The exact details of how they met are unclear, but their bond seemed to develop rapidly. Ghislaine, who was skilled at charming and managing people, became an integral part of Epstein's life. Early on, she was often described as his romantic partner, though their connection extended far beyond personal affection. She became a pivotal figure in his world, facilitating introductions, managing his social calendar, and curating the image he presented to the outside world. At the time, Maxwell's social connections were unmatched. Her ability to move seamlessly between various elite circles proved invaluable to Epstein's ambitions. She helped him access the wealthy, the powerful, and the celebrated, cementing his place in the upper echelons of society. Her presence by his side lent him an air of legitimacy, bolstered by her aristocratic background and Oxford education. For Ghislaine, the relationship provided an opportunity to reclaim the life she had lost. Epstein's wealth allowed her to maintain the luxurious lifestyle she had grown up with, while their partnership offered her a sense of purpose and influence. Together, they created a dynamic that drew attention and cultivated intrigue wherever they went. As the years went on, their roles in each other's lives became more defined. Ghislaine was not merely a companion. She became an architect of Epstein's social empire. She organized events, made introductions to key figures, and maintained an air of charm that helped smooth over any questions about Epstein's background or business dealing. Her ability to create a veneer of sophistication and credibility was instrumental in advancing his goals. The early days of their relationship were marked by an alignment of interests. Epstein's drive to climb the social ladder paired perfectly with Ghislaine's desire to restore her standing among the elite. Yet beneath the surface of this partnership lay a darker purpose, one that would ultimately unravel and expose both of them to worldwide scrutiny. Meeting Jeffrey Epstein was a pivotal moment in Ghislaine Maxwell's journey. Their relationship was rooted in mutual ambition and an uncanny ability to complement each other's strengths. But as their partnership deepened, it set the stage for a series of choices and actions that would lead to infamy, forever altering the trajectory of their lives.
The Ghislaine Maxwell who arrived in Manhattan was a socialite, elegant, connected, and disarming. But within a few years, she became something else entirely. Behind closed doors, amid the marble foyers and velvet-draped salons of Epstein's residences, Ghislaine Maxwell was no longer just a plus one. She was the recruiter. Staff inside Epstein's homes in Palm Beach, New York, and New Mexico began referring to her as the one who ran everything. While Epstein cloaked himself in mystery, Ghislaine was front of the house. She scheduled, managed, and according to court records, recruited. Her methods were subtle, sometimes chillingly so. Survivors described her as warm at first, offering mentorship, introductions, and flattery. One survivor later recalled, "Ghislaine made me feel like I was part of their world until the night I realized I wasn't." At parties, the lines blurred. Insiders say Ghislaine orchestrated events designed to look like charity galas or business mixers, but in reality, they doubled as what some staff later whispered were casting calls. Models, often underage, were introduced to Epstein through Ghislaine's social networks, including connections to modeling agencies operating between New York, Paris, and Eastern Europe. It was Ghislaine who curated the guest list, pairing young women with high-profile attendees, names from Wall Street, Hollywood, even politics. A former employee told The Guardian, "At certain events, it was clear who was there to network and who was there to disappear upstairs." The dynamic was deliberate. Ghislaine presented herself as a safe haven. Survivors said her presence disarmed them, made them feel they were being introduced to mentors, job opportunities, and potential patrons. But according to multiple accounts, that trust was weaponized. Behind velvet curtains and glass walls, staff later reported that Ghislaine quietly directed young women to back rooms. Epstein's townhouse alone had entire floors hidden from casual guests, where the business behind these gatherings unfolded. One former housekeeper in Palm Beach described Ghislaine's role bluntly. Epstein gave her the orders. She made sure they were followed. By the late 1990s, it wasn't just Ghislaine's charm keeping the operation afloat. It was her control. Survivors say she groomed them with promises of travel, scholarships, or connections to high society circles. And when victims hesitated or resisted, Ghislaine, they say, could switch at an instant. From soothing to cold, from benefactor to enforcer. While Epstein built the empire, Ghislaine laid the bricks. And in the homes where billionaires toasted vintage champagne and whispered about investment portfolios, Ghislaine's true role remained invisible to most. That is, to everyone but the young women trapped inside. They say power built on silence never holds forever, and as the walls of Epstein's network began to crack, Ghislaine's role would come under a spotlight she could no longer escape. What hits me here is the duality. How Ghislaine could be both the socialite at the gala and the recruiter behind the scenes. That kind of duplicity is chilling. It makes you wonder how many other people in high places wore the same mask. How many neighbors like Ghislaine were moving unseen through Epstein's world.
Off the coast of St. Thomas, hidden in the sapphire waters of the Caribbean, there's a small island, lush, manicured, and eerily secluded. Officially, it's called Little St. James. To others, it's been branded something far darker. Orgy Island, the island of sin, the place where secrets go to disappear. This was Jeffrey Epstein's private retreat and Ghislaine Maxwell's second home, a fortress disguised as paradise. For years, Little St. James played host to a revolving door of the world's elite. Billionaires, scientists, royalty, all ferried to its shores under the guise of business meetings and philanthropic retreats. But behind the palm trees and the pristine villas, survivors described a different reality, one of isolation, fear, and manipulation. The island staff, mostly sourced from nearby St. Thomas, worked in silence. Many signed NDAs. Some later described their orders as "do not look, do not ask." Survivors recall being flown in, sometimes alone, other times with small groups of young women, stripped of phones, surrounded by locked buildings and CCTV cameras hidden behind walls of coral and stone. Some spoke of Epstein's temple-like structure at the island's highest point, a bizarre blue and white building surrounded by statues and thick foliage. Rumors swirled that it was soundproofed. Others claimed there were hidden passageways connecting to underground rooms. No allegations about the temple have ever been confirmed, but as one survivor put it, you knew not to ask questions. You just did what you were told. And then there were guests, society whispers that still echo in the halls of Manhattan and Mayfair. Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, Silicon Valley titans, Wall Street brokers, they all visited Epstein at one time or another. Some claim it was innocent, meetings, charity events, global summits, but survivors tell a different story. One where young women, some as young as 14, were presented like appetizers to men whose names would make headlines for years to come. Staff who eventually spoke out described the island as otherworldly, a place where rules did not apply, and where cameras, not just Epstein's but allegedly Ghislaine's too, recorded nearly everything. Hidden cameras were rumored to be tucked into bedroom clocks, smoke detectors, and even outdoor landscaping. One former island employee told investigators, "We always knew Epstein had dirt on everyone who stepped foot there." And at the heart of it all was Ghislaine. Survivors say she wasn't just Epstein's partner. She was the curator, the organizer, the one who smoothed over uncomfortable silences with champagne and practiced charm. It was Ghislaine who introduced guests to the new faces, Ghislaine who comforted the girls after the fact, and Ghislaine who allegedly assured them that what happened on the island stayed there. But in 2019, when federal agents raided the island, they uncovered what many had long suspected. Dozens of incriminating photographs, hundreds of hard drives, and files labeled simply insurance. Who those files implicate, No one knows for sure. What was captured on those cameras? Still a mystery. But for Ghislaine Maxwell, the island wasn't just a retreat. It was the perfect cage, one she built, maintained, and used to trap others. As the walls around her crumbled, Ghislaine's grip on this shadow empire would begin to slip. This part always gives me the chills. The contrast, this island paradise masking something so sinister. It's the stuff of nightmares, but also a blueprint for how people of power isolate people. It makes me think about the people who stayed silent, the guests, the staff. How many of them justified what they saw? How many people pretended not to notice because of who else was standing in the room?
By 2008, something shifted. Jeffrey Epstein's empire, long protected by money and silence, was beginning to crack. And Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman who once moved effortlessly through its corridors, quietly began to fade from view. To the outside world, it seemed like Ghislaine was pulling away. Her name disappeared from the society pages. Fewer photographs surfaced of her alongside Epstein's at galas and power lunches. But was this absence the result of fear or foresight? Insiders say Ghislaine always knew when to pivot. As Epstein faced his 2008 plea deal in Florida, Ghislaine turned her attention elsewhere, specifically to the ocean. She launched the Terramar Project, a nonprofit pitched as a bold initiative for ocean conservation and sustainable development. The move raised eyebrows.
I'm the founder of an internet project called the Terramar Project. It's an ocean-based digital platform which I'm going to be talking to you about. I just want to go back briefly to talk to you about why I got involved in the ocean, because I think it's important to have history. So I started diving when I was 9, having become passionate about the ocean, watching Jacques Cousteau on TV. And it led to a lifelong exploration around the ocean that ultimately ended with me becoming a deep worker submersible pilot. On one of my first submarine dives, I was absolutely so excited. I thought, my goodness, I'm going to see a new sea creature. I'm going to be this amazing explorer. And off I was. I went down into the deep, and I went down to over 1,500 feet. And at 1,500 feet, I switched on the lights, hoping to see a new mythical sea creature, but in fact what I saw was a plastic hanger. I was so absolutely devastated, but it was at that moment that I realized that I was really going to dedicate the rest of my life to taking an involvement with and bringing an education around the ocean.
Critics quietly questioned how someone with no scientific background had suddenly become the face of a global marine initiative. Others saw it as Ghislaine's way of rebranding, distancing herself from Epstein while planting herself firmly in the world of UN conferences, environmental summits, and philanthropic panels. But behind the curtain, society whispers persisted. There were rumors that Ghislaine remained Epstein's silent partner, pulling strings behind the scenes, still acting as the gatekeeper to his network. One associate told the Times, even when she wasn't in the room, Ghislaine's fingerprints were on everything. Meanwhile, Ghislaine adopted what one former acquaintance called a nomadic shadow life. She rotated quietly between homes in London's Belgravia district, a chateau in rural France, and later a secluded estate in New Hampshire, each location more isolated than the last. Neighbors, when interviewed years later, described her as polite but distant, a ghost with a British accent who never stayed too long. Terramar itself became a curiosity. Despite its lofty mission, it quietly shut down in 2019, just days after Epstein's arrest. Its website was scrubbed, its social channels abandoned, the few press releases left behind offered no explanation. Some speculate Terramar was little more than a vanity project, a platform that gave Ghislaine access to world leaders and diplomats, even as her past with Epstein loomed in the background. In private conversations, those who shared champagne flutes with her in Manhattan were now distant themselves. Calls went unanswered and invitations revoked. And still, no one knew where she was. While survivors shared their stories and legal teams built their case, Ghislaine Maxwell became an international enigma, vanished yet still casting a long shadow. But a vanishing act can only last so long, and when the FBI finally came knocking, Ghislaine Maxwell reemerged into a very different world, one where the price of silence was about to come due. The ocean activism angle always felt like smoke and mirrors to me. It's the kind of rebrand you do when someone's trying to pivot from scandal to sainthood. I've watched enough people reinvent themselves after a scandal, but with Ghislaine, this pivot feels strategic, too rehearsed, like she was always 2 steps ahead of the storm.
For nearly a decade, Ghislaine Maxwell lived like a phantom, visible only to those who knew where to look. But on July 2nd, 2020, her time ran out. In a secluded estate tucked deep inside Bradford, New Hampshire, Ghislaine was cornered. Federal agents stormed the 156-acre property at dawn, scaling fences, deploying drones, and finding her hiding in a back room with a burner phone wrapped in tinfoil. The FBI called it a textbook takedown. But inside the Bureau, whispers told of months of painstaking surveillance, tailing offshore bank accounts, encrypted emails, and anonymous real estate purchases. Court records later revealed that Ghislaine had used multiple aliases to acquire the hideaway under the LLC, Granite Realty LLC, shielding herself behind shell companies and proxies. But the arrest was just the prologue. What came next shook the world. On December 29, 2021, after years of speculation, Ghislaine Maxwell stood trial at the U.S. District Court in Manhattan, charged with sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy to commit sex trafficking, among other crimes. Inside the courtroom, the dynamic was electric. Survivor advocates sat shoulder to shoulder with journalists and onlookers, all watching as Ghislaine, clad in civilian clothes, not a prison jumpsuit, remained eerily composed. Those who were there say her demeanor was icy, her gaze often locked straight ahead as survivors took the stand. Testimonies were gut-wrenching. One survivor described Ghislaine as the one who normalized everything, sharing how Maxwell would casually instruct girls on how to please Epstein and assure them that it was just what wealthy men expected. Another survivor testified how Ghislaine herself would perform massages on Epstein alongside the underage girls, an account that prosecutors used to shatter any defense of ignorance. Then came the exhibits, photographs of Ghislaine and Epstein relaxing at the Queen's Balmoral estate, flight logs connecting her to Epstein's private jets, a now infamous household manual outlining strict staff protocols. See nothing, say nothing. But inside Manhattan social circles, the murmurs were louder than ever. Who else knew? Who's in the black book? Will Maxwell cut a deal? The trial became a media spectacle, splashed across front pages from New York to London. Yet, behind the headlines, insiders whispered that Ghislaine's silence might be her final currency. No bombshell names were publicly dropped during the testimonies, but rumors persisted of the sealed court documents containing information that could implicate other high-profile figures still shielded from the scrutiny. Throughout it all, Ghislaine remained unreadable. Her attorneys portrayed her as the scapegoat, a woman unfairly punished for Epstein's crimes. But as each survivor's story unfolded, it became clear to many that Maxwell wasn't just complicit, she was essential.
Tonight, that bombshell verdict. Ghislaine Maxwell guilty on 5 of 6 counts in her high-profile sex trafficking trial. The British socialite who once ran in the circles of presidents and princes led out the back of the courtroom by 2 U.S. Marshals, now facing up to 65 years behind bars. A jury of 6 men and 6 women deliberating nearly 40 hours, finding Maxwell guilty on the most serious sex trafficking charges.
A unanimous jury has found Ghislaine Maxwell guilty of one of the worst crimes imaginable, facilitating and participating in the sexual abuse of children, crimes that she committed with her longtime partner and co-conspirator, Jeffreyepstein.
When the verdict came down, guilty on 5 out of 6 counts, the courtroom fell silent. One survivor later told reporters outside the courthouse, this wasn't just about Epstein. Ghislaine enabled him. She created the world where we were trapped. But Ghislaine showed no visible emotion. No tears, no outbursts, just the quiet, steady gaze of someone who had lived too long behind walls built on power and secrecy. And while the world debated the verdict's significance, one truth remained: the deeper you pull at Ghislaine Maxwell's story, the more shadows you find hiding in plain sight. For many, Maxwell's conviction represented a measure of justice, a recognition of the harm she caused, and a step toward accountability in a case that had long been shrouded in power and privilege. However, others questioned whether the sentence was enough, given the scale of crimes and the lives irreparably damaged. Maxwell's demeanor throughout the trial and sentencing was noted as largely stoic. With moments of defiance, she expressed regret but stopped short of accepting full responsibility, a stance that only deepened the divide in public opinion. Was she truly repentant, or was she maintaining the same calculated approach she displayed throughout her life? The trial of Ghislaine Maxwell was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning. It laid bare the systemic exploitation enabled by wealth and power, and it forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, complicity, and accountability. While her conviction and sentencing closed one chapter, the ripple effects of her actions and the broader implications of the Epstein saga continue to resonate, leaving an indelible mark on all involved. What sticks with me is how composed she was. No outburst, no cracks. For someone who built her life navigating the corridors of the elite, maybe she saw the trial as just another room to control. I kept thinking, who was she looking at in that courtroom? The jury, the survivors, or the invisible network of people still on the outside, watching in silence?
No cameras were allowed inside Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, but the evidence spoke volumes. What you're about to see is a chilling collection of photos presented to the jury by the prosecution. Images from inside Jeffrey Epstein's opulent West Palm Beach estate in his grandiose Manhattan townhouse, along with haunting snapshots of Epstein and Maxwell themselves. This is the world the prosecution laid bare in court. Today, Ghislaine Maxwell resides at the Federal Correctional Institution in Tallahassee, Florida, a low-security prison where she is serving a 20-year sentence for her role in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operation. Once a woman of immense privilege, accustomed to the comforts of luxury and the company of the world's elite, Maxwell now faces a starkly different reality. The shift from glamorous life to incarceration has been profound. At FCI Tallahassee, Maxwell follows the structured and regulated routines that define prison life. Her days begin early, with the first mandatory head count around 6 a.m. Like other inmates, she is assigned a prison job, a far cry from the high-profile roles she once held in social and business circles around the world. Reports indicate that Maxwell has been working in the prison library, a relatively low-stress position that allows her some degree of mental engagement. Other accounts suggest that she occasionally works in areas related to maintaining the facility, blending into the background like any other inmate. Ghislaine's day-to-day life may look something like this. Imagine waking up daily to the same early morning call, usually around 6 a.m. The days are structured and predictable, designed to keep everything running smoothly. You're surrounded by hundreds of other women, all living together in dormitory-style housing. And privacy? That's practically non-existent. Your bunk is in a shared space, and you're always around others, whether you like it or not. Meals are served in the cafeteria at specific times, and while the food isn't anything fancy, it's nutritious enough to get by. If you have special dietary needs, they'll do their best to accommodate, but don't expect gourmet options. It's all about the basics there. One of the constants in this kind of life is work. Almost everyone has a job. You might find yourself washing dishes in the kitchen, mowing lawns, or even helping with clerical tasks. The pay you ask? Let's just say is symbolic, maybe 12 to 40 cents an hour, but it's something to fill in time and a way to stay busy. Education and rehabilitation programs are a big part of the experience. If you didn't finish high school, there's a chance to get your GED. They also offer vocational training and workshops that teach life skills. For those struggling with addiction, the residential drug abuse program is an option. There's even counseling available to help inmates through personal challenges. When it comes to free time, recreation is a lifeline. You can head outside for some exercise, maybe walk the track, play basketball, or join a fitness class. For more quieter moments, there's access to the library, arts and craft programs, and even TV. Religious services are available to those who want them, providing a spiritual outlet for many. At the end of the day, life at FIC Tallahassee is about routines, rules, and finding ways to cope. It's not glamorous, but for many, it's a time to reflect and hopefully prepare for life beyond those walls. Maxwell's prison experience is shaped not just by her sentence, but also by her notoriety. Her case drew global attention, and that fame or infamy has followed her behind bars. Though she is in solitary confinement, her high profile means she is watched closely, both by prison staff and other inmates. Navigating this environment requires a careful balance, earning a degree of respect without becoming a target. As for visitors, Maxwell's contact with the outside world is limited. Her siblings have reportedly visited her, continuing to support her despite the public backlash. Her social connections, once a vital part of her identity, have largely evaporated in the wake of her conviction. The isolation of prison life is compounded by the lack of visitors, a stark reminder of the distance between her current reality and the one she once inhabited. Maxwell's sentence, handed down in June 2022, includes the possibility of release in her late 70s due to good behavior credits. Her projected release date, factoring in all these credits, is currently set for July 17, 2037. While that may seem like a lifetime away, Maxwell has not resigned herself to this fate without a fight. Her legal team has filed an appeal, arguing that she was made an scapegoat for Epstein's crimes and pointing to what they claim were procedural errors during her trial. The appeal is ongoing, though legal experts suggest that overturning her conviction or significantly reducing her sentence will be an uphill battle. Despite her efforts to seek legal reprieve, Maxwell has been vocal about her discontent with how she's been treated throughout this process. In interviews conducted since her incarceration, she had maintained her innocence, claiming she was unfairly targeted due to Epstein's death and the public demand for accountability. Her stance has done little to shift public opinion, but it underscores her ongoing denial of responsibility for her action. Life in prison is a far cry from the world of opulence Maxwell once knew, but it has also given her time to reflect, or at least to portray the image of reflection. She reportedly engages in regular exercise and takes advantage of educational opportunities offered at the facility. However, whether these activities represent genuine attempts at rehabilitation or simply the routines of a person adjusting to confinement is a question that remains unanswered. For now, Ghislaine Maxwell's future remains tethered to the confines of FCI Tallahassee and the slow-moving process of the legal system. While her appeal plays out, she faces years of monotony, introspection, and the weight of her conviction. The following are the faces behind the trial: the prosecution who fought for justice, the defense who carried out their duty, witnesses who took the stand and told what they saw, and the brave women who stepped out of the shadows to tell their stories, to confront their past and demand justice. We honor their strength.
Even after the guilty verdict, Ghislaine Maxwell remains a riddle. Was she a daughter forever trapped under the weight of Robert Maxwell's control? A woman molded by a tyrant only to become entangled with another? Or was she the architect of her own empire, a power broker who thrived in the shadows? Inside London and Manhattan's inner circles, the whispers haven't stopped. What does Ghislaine still know? Is she holding the cards no one's seen yet? A former Maxwell friend told The Guardian there are still names, people in positions of power, who are praying Ghislaine never talks. But perhaps a deeper question is about legacy, because Ghislaine Maxwell's story doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of her generational pattern. Her father, Robert, left behind a dynasty tainted by fraud and scandal, yet his methods were eerily familiar to those who later watched Ghislaine climb the Manhattan social ladder. Like Robert, Ghislaine learned how to trade favors, manipulate rooms, and weaponize proximity to power. Survivors and critics alike have called Ghislaine's conviction a partial victory, a first step, but not the finish line. Because behind her trial, there are still dozens of enablers, financiers, and silent observers who've yet to face a jury. One survivor put it simply outside the courthouse. She was the gateway, but the network still stands. Even now, as Ghislaine sits behind prison walls, her silence looms large. There are no public deals, no tell-all interviews, just closed-door meetings between attorneys and whispered conversations in places where names are never spoken aloud. And in these quiet rooms and gated estates and private clubs, the question lingers, will Ghislaine's silence hold? Or does she still possess the power to bring others down with her? But one thing is undeniable. The world Ghislaine helped build didn't end with her sentencing. It lives on, hidden behind black-tie galas and glass towers, out of reach but never out of sight. And as the ripples of her conviction continue to echo, we're left with a chilling realization. Some legacies, no matter how tarnished, refuse to die quietly. For me, this is where the story shifts from personal to systemic. Ghislaine is a part of a bigger pattern, a network of silence, money, and privilege that still feels alive today. Sometimes I wonder if this legacy, the one the Maxwells built, isn't just about scandal. It's about teaching the next generation how to weaponize access. And sadly, that cycle keeps repeating.
Ghislaine Maxwell's life is a study in contradiction. The charming Oxford-educated heiress and the silent architect behind one of the darkest criminal networks of our time. A woman who dined with royalty and billionaires by day, and according to survivors, facilitated nightmares by night. For some, she was a victim, the daughter of a manipulated patriarch doomed to repeat the cycle under another master. For others, she was the strategist, the insider who leveraged wealth and status to conceal cruelty beneath the designer dress and practice smile. But the truth, as always, is far more complex. Because Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't just orbiting power, she was part of it. A woman who learned early how to exploit the cracks in a system designed to protect the privileged and silence the vulnerable. And while her conviction offered a sense of justice to many, it also left a lingering question in every room where power still thrives. How deep does the network go? Because behind Ghislaine stood a man whose reach stretched beyond oceans, beyond borders, and into the boardrooms, palaces, and private clubs where global influence is brokered. Next week, we expose him, the financier who moved like a ghost through the corridors of power, silencing critics, collecting secrets, and leaving a trail of shattered lives in the wake. This is the story of Jeffreyepstein, his rise, his tactics, and how the aftershock of his empire still rattles the highest echelons of society today. Until then, keep questioning, keep seeking, and may your journey be as rich and enlightening as the stories you encounter.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.